Man, all that sounds really good, doesn't it? I think we've had a really good day, a full day, and this is really meant to be a community gathering, and it's really meant to. And I think Dr. Bautista's really been looking forward to this more than any other talk. He's given several talks already today, so I think this is the highlight of his day. So we've been kind of going up and down the road, and he's been giving talks at Children's and over at the Med Center. And I kind of heard Skip's comments, but I really want to thank the people that helped us put this together. And they're here in the audience, and it's LULAC, and it's the College of Pharmacy, and especially Dr. Compadre, who's did a great job in helping us bring Dr. Bautista here. And let me make sure I can read this right, so I don't want to miss anybody. And the TRI, and the folks over here at the TRI have done a great job in helping us again bring Dr. Bautista here. And Beatrice is over there, and the College of Public Health, and I think I saw Brooke come in, and Brooke is here, and LULAC, and of course the Clinton School of Public Service. And I really thank you for allowing us to have this venue. I'm going to introduce Dr. Bautista in just a second. We've been trying to do some things at the center, at UAMS, that would be more community-oriented. And we do things out in the community as it is, but I think our push now has to be more focused. And, we look at the Latino community in Arkansas, and we look at the numbers that are in medical school or pharmacy school or any professional school, and they're low. And they're if you look at African-American numbers, they're even lower than African-American numbers. So one of the things we're trying to do is make this community connection, and I think this is a way that we can do that. So having said that, I have closing remarks, so I'll say some more stuff at the end of it, but I just wanted to make that point. And I do appreciate you all coming at 6 o'clock, and it's a little chilly outside, and just joining us. I'm not going to go into a lengthy introduction of Dr. Bautista. He prefers that not be done. And I will read from his bio, a short bio. And he's currently Distinguished Professor of Medicine and Director of the Center for Study of Latino Health and Culture at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. He graduated from UC Berkeley and completed his doctoral work in the basic sciences at the University of California Medical Center at San Francisco. He served on the faculty of the School of Public Health at Berkeley in 1987 and is in his current position at UCLA. His research is on Latino Epidemiological Paradox. And he'll tell you what that is. It's hard to say, but he'll tell you what that is. It's, I said, he'll tell you what it is. He gave a talk today at Children's that kind of went over that. So he has a lot of interesting ideas and theories about demographics and populations, and that's one of the reasons he's here, because he has all these great ideas. Again, his research has expanded to the emergence of the Latino population in society in California during the Spanish colonization and Mexican Republic and U.S. Statehood periods. A portion of his research appears in a book, Cinco de Mayo in American Tradition. And I think the book is over here, okay? It was published by the University of California Press in 2012. And the last thing that I'd say is that I actually became aware of Dr. Bautista when I heard him speak at a UAMC meeting, and that's been 5 or 6 years ago. And I think the thing that impressed me so much about him is that he gave a really detailed historical perspective of migration, immigration, and population change, and population change and how events within the from a historical perspective changes how populations end up, so to speak. What events caused all these things? So that was the most impressive thing to me. He gave a long, detailed talk, and nobody left. So it was a good talk. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. David Hayes-Bautista.
Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. I've been having a great day here in Little Rock, and I want to share with you hold on a second, a little bit about some of the research I've been doing on Cinco de Mayo, but in order to do so, I want to talk a little bit about Latino leadership, okay? Now, we all know who Cesar Chavez is. Most of us have heard of Dolores Huerta. You may even heard of Corky Gonzalez. Now, I have a question, and this is not a trick question. These are great Latino leaders. Name me one Latino leader working before Cesar Chavez. One. I believe that's called crickets. Okay. So there's never been any Latino leadership? Okay. Well, thanks to Latino leadership, this country enjoys some basic elements that we all think, well, that's America. Okay, but thanks to Latino leadership, American society enjoys liberty and personal freedom, citizenship regardless of race, women's rights, the ability to go to any public service, go to any school that you want, and marry whomever you wish. These are Latino contributions. Now, many people say, well, dang, I knew that was part of America. Latinos? Mexicans got something to do with this? Okay, well, I'm going to give you a lot of information. Tomorrow, people are going to ask you, well, that guy from LA, what was he talking about? Well, you know, in medicine, we use a lot of mnemonic devices for the students to memorize lots of stuff, okay? So I have a mnemonic device to help you remember all these values that we're going to talk about, okay? Are you ready for a mnemonic device? Okay, there will be a test on this. Just kidding. Okay, here's the mnemonic device, and it is El Cinco de Mayo. People are laughing. Why do you laugh? It's a mnemonic. It really is. It's a mnemonic. Okay? Here's the question. Cinco de Mayo is celebrated all over the United States, but if you ever go to Mexico, they don't celebrate Cinco de Mayo. Why would people celebrate Cinco de Mayo so much here in the United States when it's not celebrated in Mexico? And I can give the answer in 30 seconds. You want to time me? Like 30 seconds. Okay. Well, to begin with, we need to understand one very important thing, that El Cinco de Mayo is not a Mexican holiday. Now, everybody says, oh, we're going to do Cinco de Mayo, tacos, sombreros. It's Mexico. And it's not. They don't celebrate in Mexico. So if it's not a Mexican holiday, what is it? It is an American Civil War holiday created by Latino leadership in the United States during the American Civil War. And a lot of people say, wait a minute, American Civil War, you guys weren't even here, right? Didn't y'all just go over sneak under the wire 20 years ago? No. Here and very active during the American Civil War. And it all has to do with an issue that I'm going to be talking more about tomorrow in terms of research. But the whole issue stems around, what race are Latinos? Because we're always asked to name a race, and most Latinos can't figure that question out. Well, it's always been rather confusing. It all goes all the way back to October 11th, 1492. Now, on October 11th, 1492, not one single Indian lived in the Americas. Not one. Oh, you had about 300 million people, but they weren't Indians. Okay, they were Choctaw, Maya, Tzeltal, Urepecha, you name it. They weren't Indians. But on October 12th, Christopher Columbus was trying to find India. He finally hit some land. He said, oh, I'm in India. So he goes ashore, and some people come down to check out his documents. Well, if I am India, you guys must be Indians, and we've been having confusion ever since, very get-go. So throughout Latin America, yes, there was the indigenous substrate that has been part and parcel of all of the Americas, to which we have to add the very deep African root, to which we have to add the Asian root, to which we add also the Iberian European route, but the Iberian was a little bit different from the Pilgrims, and that also included a large Jewish population and Muslim population. Remember, they had both been kicked out of Spain. Okay, so they all got together for 500 years. They've been forming families and having kids from all of the above. So if the Indian root predominates, called mestizo. If the African root predominates, it's mulatto. In fact, I don't even like to call it Latin America, certainly not Spanish America. I like to call it Indo, Afro, Oriento, Ibero, America. Because that's all. Let's honor everybody that was here. And in fact, in the Spanish colonial system, they had this, they called a system of castas, and you had 16 different ways you could be categorized depending on what proportion of indigenous, African, Asian, or Iberian you might happen to be. Now, September 4th, 1781, a group of people gathered by the river to found El Pueblo de Nuestra Señora, La Reina de los Ángeles, del Río de Porciúncula, 90012. Just kidding about the zip code. Okay, this is the full name for Los Angeles. Okay, try putting that on your business card. And they didn't come from Spain. They had just walked all the way from Culiacan in Mexico across the desert up to California. And they actually have a plaque and the little place where they founded it, and they're called the Pobladores, Los Pobladores, the founder of the city of Los Angeles. And I want us to take a really close look at them in terms of today's racial categories, okay? Of those 44 pobladores, 3 couples were an Indian married to an Indian. Now, in colonial Spain, this meant they had been born in indigenous societies, spoke indigenous languages, ate indigenous foods, but at some point had passed into Western society by becoming a Christian. And they would learn some Spanish and start eating Western foods in addition to all the indigenous. One couple was an Indian married to a mulata of Spanish and African origin. One couple was a mestizo married to a mulata. 2 couples were mulattos married to mulatas. Remember, they were all Christians. That was the main thing. You had to be Christian. 1 couple was an African married to a mulata. 2 couples were a Spaniard married to an Indian. Well, of course, that immediately makes all of their kids mestizos. So of the 44 pobladores, only 2 were in theory Spanish, although we have to be careful that in northern frontier New Spain, being called an Español didn't necessarily mean you came from Spain. It could mean, oh, he fought on the side of the crown. So, okay. There could have been like no Europeans. So here we have the founding of Los Angeles. By the way, there was also a family from Asia. They were called Manilos, but that means they sailed from Manila. They could have come from China, they could have come from Japan, could have come from India, Malaysia, Philippines, we don't know. But they had been exposed to smallpox, so they were in quarantine at the mission at San Gabriel for another 2 weeks. So they missed the opening day by 2 weeks. I like to throw them in there. So in its very first day, LA reflected America's diversity, Indo, Afro, Oriento, Ibero, America, and that was the experience of most of the Western Hemisphere for the past 500 years. Now, in 1810, Mexico declares independence from Spain. Father Hidalgo rings that bell. That's what you celebrate on the 16th of September. That is Mexican Independence Day. And he declared the same universalist values as on July 4, 1776, freedom, equality, democracy, but he actually meant it. And in his cry of independence, he said, oh, by the way, we're going to abolish slavery in Mexico. In fact, he said, I'm going to give the slave owners 10 days to free the slaves, or I'm going to put the owners in jail. And he declared racial equality in civil rights. Everyone, he said, will be a citizen of the Republic of Mexico. Doesn't matter what your grandparents were like, you will be a citizen. This is 1810. Like 55 years before Abraham Lincoln. Let's not go there. In fact, just 2 months after he declared independence, his lieutenant, Jose Maria Morelos, publicly announced the establishment of this new government of Mexico. He said that will not label anyone as Indian, mulatto, nor any race, but rather all will be known in common as Americans, not even Mexicans, but somos americanos, no? San Martin said the same thing. Bolivar said the same thing. We're Americans. And we're Americans because we believe in these things. And every Latin American country that declared independence, wrote its constitution, abolished slavery, declared racial equality in citizenship. Well, out here in the West, we were part of Mexico. So these were the constitutional values that people were accustomed to here. Slavery abolished, racial equality and citizenship. Oh, by the way, married women had rights. They could own property independently of their husband. But along came the first big bang. In 1848, the U.S. Constitution arrived. Now, you know, the history I was taught is that these pioneers trekked across the wilderness, like there was nothing there. You had a constitution, you had government, you had buildings, you had schools, you had hospitals, you had clinics. I mean, you had a whole society. And this new constitution permits slavery, denies citizenship to non-whites, and when a woman married, she basically legally ceased to exist. Her husband made all the decisions for her. Well, these former Mexican citizens thought, you know, these are important rights. We're going to go to the California Constitutional Convention in Monterey, and we're going to fight for our rights. And you had Indo-Afro-Ibero-Americans at the Constitutional Convention. It was a real shock to the folks coming out from the East Coast. For example, Manuel Dominguez clearly was of Indian background. In fact, it was commented on, what is this Indian doing here? And they said, well, he's the richest landowner in the state. Hello. Pablo de la Guerra. And you had African origin. Antonio Maria Pico. We don't have his photo. This is a photo of his full first cousin, Pio de Jesus Pico, who was the last Mexican governor of California, and clearly he is of African and Indian origin, very, very clearly. In fact, we look at the 1790 census, and his grandmother and all his uncles were categorized by the Spanish as mulattoes. But under Mexico, he was governor of the state of California. And so these issues of race, citizenship, slavery were argued, and they helped to write the Constitución del Estado de California. Oh, they also wrote a version in English, but California came in as a bilingual state. In fact, the Constitution clearly stated that all laws, decrees, regulations, and provisions, which from their nature require publication, shall be published in English and Spanish. Spanish is not a foreign language in California. That is how we came into the Union. But there's more. The issue of slavery was hotly contested, and the California Constitution continued, honored Mexico's earlier abolition. California came in as a free state. Now, you remember the Missouri Compromise? States supposed to come in matched pair, one free, one slave. We didn't have an accompanying slave state because California had the gold. The U.S. wanted California. To get the gold, okay, you can come in as a free state. That upset the balance. And citizenship was extended to non-whites. Here again is Pio de Jesus Pico. Former governor, he was a citizen. He voted in every election until 1894. And as you know, in Alabama, he was property. Very different notions. And women rights were continued in the California Constitution. Let me just show you how this works out. Here is an ad taken out 6 years later by this lady, Petra Varela de Rubio. Now we know she's married. Her last name, maiden name is Varela, and she married a Rubio, so you add in the de Rubio. And she's taking out this ad, and she says, none of my children has the right or authority to sell grapes from my vineyard because I alone am the absolute owner of this property. Not her husband, not Mr. Rubio. She owned this property. And in Pennsylvania, she would have to go to, hubby dear, could you tell my children? No, this had been part of Mexico. Women had rights. Then along came the second big bang. Oh my God, they discovered gold. Well, in fact, I was raised up by the gold country, and I heard all my life about the 49ers who trekked across the plains, the 49ers who sailed around the Horn, and nobody ever said, oh, there were Latino miners. So I'm thinking, wow, I mean, they didn't care about gold? Well, yes, they did. And in fact, there was a huge immigration seeking gold. Al oro, to the gold. Tens of thousands walked the same road that the predecessors had from northern Mexico in, I mean, it's only about 3-4 week walk. You can get there within a month. They came primarily from Mexico. Thousands more came by ship from every port, from Valparaiso, Guaymas, El Salvador, Central America, up to San Francisco. In fact, this is a book I'm finishing. We have just discovered the diary of the only known diary so far of a Mexican 49er. He left Guadalajara, went to San Francisco, and here he starts his diary. February 9th, 1849, fully cognizant that just 7 months earlier, California had been part of Mexico. Tens of thousands of gold seekers from Latin America poured into California. They met, they formed families, and far from disappearing, they had kids. And I'm a demographer, so I like to dig up data. And it's not enough to somebody say, well, they had kids or they didn't have kids. Let's look at the data. So here are Latino babies being born in Los Angeles from 1850 to 1860. Now you notice that line just goes up. In fact, it just about triples. And here are the non-Hispanic white. But the babies being born after 1850 are very different from their parents. In many ways, they were like a second generation for immigrants, only some of the people hadn't immigrated. They were there. Here's one of them. Isn't he a cute little tyke? This is Reginaldo Francisco del Valle, born in Los Angeles in 1854. But he grew up differently from his parents. He was a U.S. citizen from the moment he was born, and he grew up to be bilingual and bicultural. He also grew up to found the campus I have the honor to serve, UCLA, but that's a whole other story. Yes, founded by a Latino, a bilingual bicultural. What did it mean to be a bicultural bilingual Californian during the gold rush? Well, to begin with, they had been celebrating 16th of September, Mexican independence, ever since 1822. Why give up a perfectly good holiday? So here they are in 1856, still celebrating Mexican independence. But they're now part of the United States, so we add in El 4 de Julio, 4th of July. So you get like two holidays. This is bicultural. You get the benefits of both. Bilingual. Okay, Spanish language newspapers had been published ever since 1851. So here's El Clamor Público, published in Los Angeles. You notice this page is in Spanish. You turn the page, and the next page is in English. Yeah, you see that a lot too, don't you, these days? This is where it all begins in the gold rush. And one of the topics that the newspapers just couldn't wrap their heads around were the politics in the U.S. over slavery and race. I mean, Latinos say, hey, we fixed that 50 years ago. What? And I thought this was a free country. And they were just shocked to discover that the rest of the country still allowed slavery. And in fact, part of the prize for California's admission as a free state without an accompanying slave state was basically slavery was allowed to spread through all the other territory taken from Mexico. The fugitive slave law was greatly enforced. Well, what's interesting and what you don't hear a lot about in terms of the Underground Railroad is one of the biggest branches went south from Louisiana, Texas into Mexico. Because Mexico, in fact, when it rewrote its constitution in 1857, explicitly stated a slave from any other country was free the moment that slave set foot on Mexican territory. And also this issue about denying citizenship to non-whites, particularly the Dred Scott decision. Oh, Latinos were all over it. They did not like this at all. Here's an editorial written shortly after in 1857 in Los Angeles that according to the constitutions, Africans are considered only as property and they will never be able to attain the position of citizens. Well, your Pico or many of his cousins and everybody else, you're thinking, wait a minute, we thought we were admitted as citizens in our country. Now you're telling me we might not be citizens? I mean, this is not right. So when the American Civil War finally broke out, and we almost had civil war in 1850, but for the compromise of 1850, it took 9 months. The government was frozen for 9 months as people were trying to figure out, how do we can't lose California's got the gold, but it comes in as a free state and they won't budge. What do we do? Finally, the Civil War broke out and Latinos knew all about the Civil War. For example, this iconic first battle between the ironclads. Well, these are buques blindados in Spanish, el monitor, the monitor, la Merrimack. They knew every detail of construction of those ships. They knew every shot that was fired. When the Emancipation Proclamation took force on January 1st, 1863, it was published and commented on in San Francisco. And the comments, by the way, kind of beat up Abraham Lincoln, saying, oh, great, you free the slaves in the rebelling states. What about the slaves in the states that are still in the Union where it actually could have force? Why not get rid of the whole damn thing? And the question earlier arose, well, what side in this great battle will Latinos support? Well, for Latinos who come out of the Americano tradition of freedom and equality, this was kind of a no-brainer. I mean, what were the issues between the United States and the Confederate States? The Confederacy fighting to establish a new republic based on slavery, whereas Lincoln eventually was fighting for freedom. The Confederacy fighting to maintain a system just completely blatantly based on racial inequality, whereas Lincoln eventually came around to the side of racial equality. And the Confederacy fighting to maintain elitist plantation rule. Lincoln wanted government of the people, by the people, and for the people. For Latinos who were from Colombia and Peru and Chile and Mexico and El Salvador and Californios, this was, okay, Lincoln sounds like what we're familiar with. And so Latinos came in on the side of Abraham Lincoln. And not just with words. Actually, many Latinos took up arms. This is Major Jose Ramon Pico, yes, first cousin of Pio Pico, who organized 4 companies of Spanish-speaking cavalry, the Compañía de Caballería, Troop A from San Jose, Troop B from San Francisco, Troop C from Santa Barbara, Troop D from Los Angeles. They not only rode off to war. Here we have the ironic situation. These are the Spanish-speaking cavalry, United States cavalry, tracking down English-speaking Confederate bandits in the Coast Range just south of Monterey. And in New Mexico, here is Major Rafael Chacon, who organized similar units of Spanish-speaking cavalry. And by the way, they beat the Confederates at the Battle of Valverde Pass. In Texas, Juan Nepomuceno Cortina, who in the 1850s had been an outlaw, supported Lincoln, and now he's fighting the Confederates. Even the first full admiral of the United States Navy was a bilingual, bicultural Latino, David Farragut. Well, I know, and they pronounce it Farragut, right? Damn the torpedoes, bilingual, bicultural. Okay. But from the very beginning, you know, the Confederacy won war, and from the first Battle of Bull Run, for the next couple of years, it seemed like they were winning war after battle after battle after battle, and things are going badly for the army of Abraham Lincoln. And Latinos are thinking, oh my God, and the Confederacy expanded. They took New Mexico, they took Arizona, they're at the Colorado River. Their next stop was going to be the port of Los Angeles because they needed an open seaport to ship munitions and supplies. So Latinos are thinking, oh my God, they're coming after us. And if the Confederacy takes California, and we're mixed race, you know, where does that put us? And just when they thought things couldn't get worse, they got worse. Enter Napoleon III, Emperor of the French, who loved the Confederates. Well, he loved Confederate cotton. French banks actually had raised huge million-dollar bond issues to support the Confederate dollar. Well, when the Civil War had broken out, actually Confederates sent emissaries to Juarez to ask if he would allow them to go through Mexican territory so they could evade the blockade. He said, of course not. Are you kidding? What are you fighting for? What are we here for? No. So Napoleon had an idea. What if I got rid of that pesky Mexican Republic, got rid of that pesky Constitution with strange guarantees, and what if I put in my guy, Maximilian, a crowned head, a monarch, and he can make nice with the Confederates? That was his goal. So early in 1862, he sent his troops marching towards Mexico City. Well, ever since the Confederate guns had fired in Fort Sumter, Latinos had been supporting the United States in its fight against the slave states. Now, with the French in Mexico with the clear intention of forming an alliance with the Confederates, Latinos said, well, now we also got to support Mexico in its fight against the French, because if the French and the Confederates ever link up, this Civil War is over and the wrong side has won. So in the Spanish language newspapers, with about a 3-week delay, Latinos were reading about what was happening in Mexico as well. They've been reading all the dispatches from the East Coast as the French army left its stronghold in Orizaba, Veracruz, marching towards Mexico City. And they were marching pretty rapidly, apparently without meeting much opposition. They are about 3 days march away from Mexico City. And already Juarez is preparing to evacuate Mexico City. But before they go to Mexico City and put their monarch in, who can make an alliance with Confederates, they have to pass through a town called Puebla. Now, what battle is celebrated on Cinco de Mayo? The Battle of Puebla. But why is it important to Latinos in the United States? Well, we'll see, because on the morning of May 5th, 1862, and this is just 3 weeks before McClellan starts his ill-fated Peninsula Campaign, the French army charges the walls of Puebla thinking, we're going to have this over by afternoon. We'll be in Mexico City in 3 days. Faury, the French general, was already writing to Napoleon, I'm the master of Mexico. But it took 3 weeks for the news to arrive all the way from Mexico City up to San Francisco. And when Latinos opened the news 3 weeks later, the news was, Viva Mexico! Viva la Independencia! Viva Zaragoza! The French did not make it to Mexico City. They were stopped, roundly, soundly defeated at the Battle of Puebla. And this was like a ray of lightning for Latinos. After hearing of dismal effects ever since the first Battle of Bull Run, finally a big, clear, decisive victory, and there were spontaneous celebrations throughout the West in California, Nevada, and Oregon. And then Latinos organized. This is where Latino leadership came into play, and they organized the first regional network of Latino community organizations, and they began to celebrate Cinco de Mayo every year. So here we are a year later, the first anniversary of the Battle of Puebla. Here is Cinco de Mayo being celebrated in Camp Calaveritas. That's up in the Gold Country in Calaveras County. Mark Twain and the Big Jumping Frog at Calaveras County. That county, okay. Here's Cinco de Mayo in Stockton, 1864. Cinco de Mayo in San Francisco, el siempre glorioso Cinco de Mayo. Here is Cinco de Mayo in Hornitos. That's another mining town in Mariposa County. Cinco de Mayo in San Andres. That's in Amador County. Here's Cinco de Mayo in Sutter Creek. Yes. Little cheap wines if you're a college student. Sutter Creek wines, okay. Cinco de Mayo in Virginia City, Nevada. Here's Cinco de Mayo in the mine of New Almaden, just right south of San Jose. As it became a symbol, it was a public statement as to where Latinos stood on the issues of the Civil War. As they marched through the streets, they were saying, we oppose slavery, we support freedom, we oppose white supremacy, we support racial equality, we oppose elitist rule, we support government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And the women stepped up and even organized their own selves because they had their own property, they could keep their own money. They organized women's, the juntas de señoras. Well, I actually go to Gettysburg every year. I've been doing that for the past 4 years because the military historians are beginning to weigh in, and they're beginning to realize how important the Battle of Puebla was to the Union effort. Because if the French had taken Puebla, taken Mexico City, because you know McClellan was going to get whipped in a 7 days battle outside of Richmond, and the Confederacy was riding high the summer of '62, just waiting for someone to recognize them, and Maximilian could have easily recognized them. That would have been the end of the Civil War. Or even if they hadn't been recognition, if the Confederates had had access to superior French weapons, the rifled cannons, the powder, etc. I mean, Confederate gunpowder stank, quite frankly. It was horrible, horrible quality. They never knew where that ball was going to land. It was horrible quality. Just think they had good quality. And when Lincoln had to run for re-election in 1864, and it still wasn't clear he was going to win, it still wasn't clear the Union was going to prevail. Remember, he had written out, not his resignation letter, but it was to his successor. Basically, if you were elected, obviously I've lost and I've lost the war. So Latinos got way behind Lincoln. And I love this campaign announcement. Para Presidente Abraham Lincoln. And look at the flags. The Mexican flag and the United States flag, because those are the flags of freedom and democracy. Well, finally, after 4 long years of war, at Appomattox, finally Lee surrendered. 2 years later, the so-called Emperor Maximilian was captured, tried, and executed, and Latinos could breathe a sigh of relief that their children were going to grow up under freedom, not slavery, under racial equality, and not white supremacy, and under democracy. And actually, in many ways, the U.S. Constitution began to look like all the other constitutions in the Western Hemisphere. Remember, the 13th Amendment got rid of slavery, 14th and 15th, and white supremacy. Now, we still didn't pass the Women's Rights Amendment. However, the concept of women having rights has worked its way into every state legal code that gives you the joint property, it gives you palimony, all this other stuff is because of this old Iberian legal concept. So that's how these first 3, liberty and personal freedom, citizenship regardless of race and women's right, are in part Latino contributions to the United States. Now let's look at use of any public service. After World War II, Dr. Hector P. Garcia he had served as a medical officer. He went back to Houston, Texas, and he noticed that the Veteran Hospital was denying services to African American and Latino service people, veterans. So he pulled together a group called the American GI Forum that still exists, and he pressured and hectored and sued so that the Veterans Administration finally would provide services to all veterans, irrespective of racial background. And when Private Felix Longoria's remains were sent back to Texas, his parents wanted to have him buried in the city cemetery, and the city father said, "Oh, no, this is for white bones only." And they, hello, he just gave his life for our country. And Dr. Garcia got behind it and started to break the barrier in use of public facilities. Going to school where you want. Right after World War II, in Orange County, Westminster, this couple, Gonzalo and Felicitas, Gonzalo was Mexican-American, she was Puerto Rican. She took her daughter, Sylvia, across the street to register at the school. She was denied registration because that was a whites-only school. She had to go to the Mexican school. Any Puerto Ricans in the audience? Well, you don't tell a Puerto Rican mom no about something happened to their kid, okay? She sued, and that became the legal precedent later for Brown v. Board of Education, because this was the legal precedent, and the Supreme Court judge, Earl Warren, had presided on Mendez v. He knew the whole situation. He knew what to do. Marry whom you wish. During World War II, on the aircraft production line in Southern California, Andrea Perez met the love of her life, Sylvester Davis. She wanted to get married. She went down to take a marriage license from the LA County recorder. He denied it because, after all, different races could not marry. She said, "You want to bet?" And she sued, and she won, and she was able to marry him, and that was the legal precedent for Loving v. Virginia, if you've seen that movie. These were the precedents. So when someone says, well, I've never heard of Latino leadership, now we know yes. And it wasn't always generals and stuff, it was just ordinary citizens standing up for their rights. That is leadership. So these are Latino contributions to the United States, not made alone, but together we are stronger, together we are more united. So that is why I gave you the mnemonic of Cinco de Mayo. Now let's look at Cinco de Mayo today. Cinco de Mayo in 1996 got its postage stamp, and in 2005 for the first time was celebrated in the White House, has been celebrated every year since then. I'm curious what's going to happen this year. Just saying. And today, Cinco de Mayo is probably the best known Latino event, and millions of people, I bet you celebrate. I know you celebrate here in Little Rock. I got an ad. I mean, the strangest places. But if you ask these millions of people, but why are we celebrating? Nobody knows. Just a big party for some. And it's become Drinko de Mayo. Or now in these times, there are those who are going to see it as one of these foreign things that we shouldn't. Okay, I took this right off the website, one of these, about Cinco de Mayo is not American. He said, it should be celebrated in their country, not in America. Well, it happens to be their country is America. Okay, a lot of illegals celebrate it here in America. I would like to see a law, no promoting Cinco de Mayo in America. Anyone celebrates this in May 5th, in any American city or town, faces a fine of $500 plus 5 days in jail. Foreign holiday in the middle of the American Civil War. Well, you know, if we had more time, I'd like for us to just think, what would you like to tell this person? But I have something better for you. I've got a video, a little short video. And then we can settle down and have some fun.
Cinco de Mayo is the most popular Latino celebration in the United States. Every year, millions of people celebrate it in venues ranging from small grammar school dances to large commercial fiestas. Yet, in Mexico, the Cinco de Mayo is not widely celebrated as it is in the U.S. So the question is, why is the Cinco de Mayo so widely celebrated in the U.S. when it is not in Mexico? The answer is that the public celebration of Cinco de Mayo was created by Latinos living in the American West, California, Nevada, and Oregon during the dark days of the American Civil War. Wait a minute. Latinos in the American Civil War? What is that all about?
During the American Civil War, many Spanish-language newspapers were published in California. In Los Angeles, El Amigo del Pueblo, and, for example, in San Francisco, El Eco del Pacífico.
We can read these Spanish-language newspapers today, and we can hear Latino voices speaking to us from 150 years ago. At times, the voices tell us about Latino daily life, restaurants serving Mexican food, musicians to provide tunes, musical and theatrical performances, births of the next generation, weddings, and deaths. We also hear the voices of Latinos concerned about policy issues that were tearing the United States apart, like slavery and race. When the American Civil War erupted, Latinos supported Abraham Lincoln and the United States against the Confederate slave states who wanted to create a new nation built upon forced labor held in chains. Latinos took up arms against the slave states. Major Jose Ramon Pico organized 4 troops of Spanish-speaking United States cavalry. But from the very first armed encounter of the Civil War, the slave states rode a streak of luck, winning battle after battle, while the Spanish-language newspapers informed Latino readers of defeat after defeat for the United States Army. And then, things got worse. Taking advantage of Lincoln's preoccupation with the Civil War, Napoleon III, Emperor of the French, sent his troops marching towards Mexico City to overthrow the constitutional republic headed by President Benito Juárez. and install Maximilian of Austria as the Emperor of Mexico, who would then be free to cooperate with the slave states in the rebellion against the United States. But the French troops were stopped dead at the Battle of Puebla, fought on Cinco de Mayo of 1862, and could not reach Mexico City to create a slave state friend south of the border. In California, Nevada, and Oregon, Latinos read the news of the unexpected victory of Cinco de Mayo and immediately began celebrating this first major victory with the Latino music and dances of the American Civil War. And you will notice they did not use mariachi music, for the simple reason that mariachis had not yet been invented. And they did not have dancing Adelitas, as those were to be the symbols of the 20th century Mexican Revolution. Every Cinco de Mayo during the Civil War, Latinos in the American West would gather in great crowds to hear speeches.
On this great day of Cinco de Mayo, we remember the power of hope, the power of the people to overcome great odds. And we remember, we've won in the past, and we will win again.
They would march in huge parades.
Today, we band together to join our brothers and sisters in the fight.
Speakers would remind Latinos that they were struggling against both the slave states and their potential ally, the Emperor of the French, Napoleon III.
We unite to raise money, people, and any other resources we can spare for Mexico's fight for independence.
After the parades and speeches, Latinos gathered in meeting halls and in private houses to renew their energies to stop the slave states and the French in Mexico, using the music and steps they were familiar with. We at UCLA invite you to learn more about the American Civil War origins of the Cinco de Mayo in California, Nevada, and Oregon. We invite you to read about the Declaration of Independence in Spanish, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation freeing the slaves in the rebelling states, the shocking assassination of Abraham Lincoln, and the final surrender of the slave states without their slaves.
Cantan con lira rota. Adiós mamá Carlota, adiós mi tierno amor. Y en tanto los chinacos ya cantan la victoria, guardando tu memoria sin miedo ni rencor. Dicen mientras el viento tu embarcación azota. Adiós mamá Carlota, adiós mi tierno amor. Adiós mamá Carlota, adiós mi tierno amor.
Thank you. And so, in closing, that is why we celebrate El Cinco de Mayo. And I know it's celebrated here in Arkansas. And LULAC is involved as another one of the organizations that dates actually from the 1920s. But I have an idea. Yes, we like to celebrate Cinco de Mayo, but we're in rather serious times again. So what I'm doing is I speak at a lot of university campuses, and kids want to do the real Cinco de Mayo now, not just the Drinko de Mayo. And I say, okay, but let's just add in one more thing. Given that the Cinco de Mayo had its origins as a civil rights commemoration, why don't we bring it back to its roots and let's celebrate Cinco de Mayo para justicia social, for social justice, right? Let's do it next time. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Does it work? Is it on? Okay. I think now you're supposed to answer some questions. So we have a question and answer session.
Okay. Everything you want to know about Cinco de Mayo.
So, I first thing, thanks for such a great talk. So if you got a question, just raise your hand, and we'll bring the microphones to you.
I don't know if you noticed at the beginning, When Johnny Comes Marching Home Again in Spanish. Yeah, they sang all the Civil Wars, Home Sweet Home, you name it. John Brown, but they sung them in Spanish and in English. They were bilingual by that point. No questions? Okay,
Can you-
give them the final.
well-
Give them the final. No, got to do the final exam.
Can you, nobody had a question, but can you just talk a little bit about the epidemiological paradox?
Epidemiological paradox. Oh,
Yeah.
I gave a 45-minute talk on that at Children's Hospital. Well, the paradox is the 57 million Latinos in the U.S. can be characterized reasonably as having lower income, lower education, less access to care than the norm. And yet, compared to the national norm, Latinos have 30% fewer heart attacks, 40% fewer cancers, 20% fewer strokes, have lower infant mortality, smoke less, drink less, do less drugs, have a 3.5-year longer life expectancy. And it seems like a paradox, but when 52% of the babies born in California are Latino, I keep saying that's not a paradox, that's actually the epidemiological norm. Just we have been so unwilling to deal with diversity, we forgot to watch and figure out how do they do that, so now we don't. It's a paradox, it's the norm. It is the norm. So that's what we've been studying. I had a wonderful session this morning, and then tomorrow at the School of Pharmacy, we're going to be talking about the research implications of all of that. But the Cinco de Mayo helps me to understand how this all began.
Well, I was just going to say, Texas was happy as part of Mexico until there was no more slavery, and then Texas seceded. Would you kind of put that in the context
Sure.
of California and all?
The Alamo, you've all heard of the Alamo, right? Well, the issues at the Alamo were, Mexico had abolished slavery in 1810. Here we are now, 1830, when was the Alamo? 5, 4, somewhere around mid-30s? 6, okay. You had then people coming in from the southern part of the U.S., but bringing their slaves. And they were warned over and over and over again, this is illegal, you can't do this. So finally Santana said, look, I'm coming up and you're going to get free your slaves. And they said no, and they holed up in the Alamo. And the issue was basically about slavery and race, with Mexico wanting to apply its constitutional values. Won the battle at the Alamo, but then lost the subsequent war. And then Texas, at Washington on the Brazos, as they call it, wrote the Texas Constitution with a full slave code and black code. No black person could ever be freed and live in Texas. No slave could ever be freed. I mean, there's clearly as part of that whole culture. And Texas was part of the Confederacy during the Civil War. And it was rather interesting because kind of the western half of Texas was heavily Latino, was very pro-union. But you had some Latinos actually were with the Confederates. There were a few. But in the rest of the West, Latinos in New Mexico, in Arizona, California, Nevada, Oregon is really clear. We're with the Union, we're with Abraham Lincoln, we're with the United States. Yes, question?
I was going to say that one-third of Texans served in the Union Army, and here in Arkansas, 1/4 of individuals actually served in the Union Army also. It's an interesting, part of history that we have lots of monuments to the Confederate soldiers, but nobody wants to talk about those individuals. And like you were saying, in Texas, it's an interesting history. Now, I have a story I'll tell you later about what I call
over at Tequila, right?
Whitewashing history in terms of the contributions of Latinos in the Texas independence as well. As you know, I think 17 Texicans or individuals of Mexican heritage were in the Alamo. There were 2 African Americans that died in the Alamo as well. So it's a complicated.
It's very
story.
complicated. The Mexicans were in the Alamo because they were fighting a war with Mexico City. They got co-opted by the Southerners who were fighting for slavery. Yeah, very complex in Texas, very complex.
Could you give us a hint of how do you propose to use the Cinco de Mayo as a leadership and civil rights starting point?
Well, actually, I would like to empower you to exercise your leadership. Actually, we have, and I'll be happy to say, we actually put together an 8th grade level, we call it Cinco de Mayo in a box. So if an 8th grade teacher wanted to do the real Cinco de Mayo, here are all the materials, and it includes this video too, by the way, with all the materials to actually do a real Cinco de Mayo. What was it all about? So I would like to, let's talk. Okay, how could you exercising your Latina leadership, somehow raise the profile of Cinco de Mayo as a civil rights commemoration. Let's stop moving. Can we help her? Let's brainstorm a little bit. I'm serious. Let's take it back for the beer companies.
I can probably talk to my students too.
Okay, I'll send you a Cinco de Mayo in a box. Not a problem. Just give me your card. I've got a question over here.
Well, my question is a global context. You know, from your experience in Americas, you know, whether we have a fence or strong border, in 100 years, is it going to make any difference? You know, now from Africa and Middle East, a lot of migration happening to Europe, and most of the population is in Asia. And if there is a global warming and, you know, droughts happening, it's going to be mass migration, right?
Well,
in 100 years. But how do you project?
Well, there is going to be also you're getting the demographic implosion, and you get a country like Japan just imploding. It's going from 130 million to 80 million by about 2040. I'm just almost by half. The European countries are also slowly imploding, not quite as rapidly as Japan. Russia is pretty much imploding. It's about the only industrialized country with life expectancy is getting shorter. China, because of the one baby policy, is also slowly. So actually, the only places there are growth are in India and Africa, quite frankly. Even Latin America, growth has really, every Latin American country except Guatemala now has a below replacement level fertility. So those are the areas of demographic growth. So that is likely to be where more population would be coming from. Now, how do you get from India or Africa to here? You got to get on a plane, which means you're cutting off a lot of the population from that ability. So yeah, but there's going to be pressures, and European countries, even Japan, has got to talk about accepting immigration. And the Japanese have been very, very, you don't want to be Korean living in Japan. It's pretty tough. Although there is the strange case of Japanese who went to Brazil about 100 years ago, and now they're third generation Brazilian Japanese going back to Japan, and maybe they'll loosen that country up a little bit, who knows. A question, can you wait for the mic? I think they're recording this.
So clearly there are a lot of evidence of diversity for many, many years. So what are the variables that got us to the point we are now, fighting the same battles we fought 200 years ago?
Well, actually, I just released a new book. Let me find it here. I can show you. It just was released on February 7th of this year. I'll find it here in just a second, where I talk about this, so why now? What are we doing here? And here it is, and it is. There you go. This book, oops, got to put it on the La Nueva California, Latinos from Pioneers to Post-Millennials. And in this, I started on the third day of the California Constitutional Convention when Antonio Maria Carrillo, who was the mayor of Los Angeles, who went to the convention, stood up in that convention and said through an interpreter, because he didn't learn English until about 5 years later, they had heard a gentleman from the East Coast say that this new Constitution being written was only being written for Americans and not for Latinos, and that he begged to differ. He said he was as American as anyone in that room. And a big fight ensued. What Latinos meant by American is we believe in no slavery, we believe in racial equality, we believe in women's rights. Hey, we speak two languages in the state, that's fine. We'll learn some English, you learn some Spanish. But those, for us, are what it means to be American. At that point, you had the upsurging of the Nativist Movement in the United States. That was personified 5 years later in the American Know Nothing Party. No, an American doesn't believe in those. American is racially white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, English-speaking. That is American. You don't have to believe in this stuff. Just be born. Pick your parents correctly, you're American. Pick them incorrectly, you're not. And they had a big fight at the Constitutional Convention. Latinos won. 5 years later, the American Know Nothing Party sweeps out of the East Coast, virulently anti-Catholic, anti-immigrant. 20 years later, in California, Dennis Kearney founded the Working Man's Party to kick the Chinese out of California. He got a new constitutional convention, rewrote the Constitution basically to make it illegal to be Chinese in California, and he got rid of the bilingual, virulently anti-bilingual, anti-immigrant. 20 years later, 1890s, the American Protective Association was formed. What were they trying to protect America from? Immigrants and Catholics. Okay, World War I, the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, Jim Crow laws hit California. California segregates itself. 1930s, we had the massive deportations of Mexicans during the Depression. 1950s, Operation Wetback. 1970s, the English-only movement kicks up. 1990s, Proposition 187. And 20 years later, right on schedule, our current administration. So it's been this fight between nativists who insist that you must be born American, and you must be born white and European to be American, and the universalists who say, no, we believe in freedom, democracy, equality, hard work, take care of your family, personal responsibility. Hey, we've been doing that all our lives. So it's, again, do you believe it's something you're born with or something that binds us all together, values and behaviors? And we're just having another round of that fight. Came right on schedule. I quoted Donald Trump in my last chapter of this book. I saw him coming. Then we take him to pieces with the data. Sorry, long answer to short question, but.
It's the fight continues, I guess.
It's part of this country's history, yes. Hi.
Thank you for the presentation. You said something that I think was powerful to me. You said that ordinary people speak up for their rights, and that's leadership.
Yes.
So that was for me very powerful. Now, could you have a microphone? Oh,
It's not on.
talking to the microphone.
Push it up.
It's on? So, ordinary people speaking up for their rights, that's leadership.
Yes.
And that's is my quote from you.
Let me give you another one, by the way, before you finish.
Okay.
Courage. Courage is not absence of fear when you're speaking up. Courage is being so damn scared, your knees are knocking, and you don't want to do this, you'd give anything not to do this, but you go ahead and stand up and say your piece. That is courage, when you're deathly afraid, but you do it anyway.
Thank you. Now you say that these two families, you know, the intermarriage couple and the school, they won their battles. Mm-hmm. My question is, what elements or what strategies these ordinary people today, like me, can we develop to win battles in a professional manner, in a personal manners?
Well, we have a very long agenda in only 5 weeks. Healthcare, anybody? Education? We can start right there, because our kids are going to suffer. And remember, all it took is a Puerto Rican mom to step up and say, you can't do this to my daughter. And we finally got desegregated school. Now we got the voucher thing going on. We got a lot of battles ahead. Don't worry. If we want, we'll talk about it later.
Well,
I'm sure we can give us some help.
I would like to know more about it. If you have a book, or you know, I would like to know and get in touch with you and definitely read.
It's together. Yes. We do it together.
Yes.
People together in this room, you know who she is? Let's work on this together. We're stronger together. We're smarter together than we are alone.
Thank you.
No.
It's not.
It's on. It is.
Here we go. I just need to hold it closer. What is the most useful answer a Latin American can give when asked about their race?
The millennials, by the way, and I'm talking about this more in terms of method, because in healthcare we're always looking at disparities and we track them by race. I'm sorry, I thought my voice was loud enough. My wife is always telling me to tone it down, don't get so excited. Because in medicine, we're used to tracking disparities by race. Tomorrow, I'm going to be talking in California how 41% of the babies born are racially ambiguous. Okay, they're mestizo in various ways, which means, what do we do with them? You can't just, we do assign them races, right? We can assign the race of the mother, and the babies go this way, or we can assign the race of the father, and they go that way, or we can assign the least white race, and it goes some other way. But in terms of science, what have we just done? In chemistry, hydrogen is always hydrogen, oxygen is always oxygen. Take 2 hydrogen, oxygen, you're going to get water. And you can't have one of the hydrogens say, well, today I want to be iron. Okay, no, sorry, it doesn't work. But we do that all the time with race. Latinos are horribly confused when asked what race they are. In fact, about 42% of Latinos, when asked, are you white, black, Asian, Indian, or other, I must be other, and I'll be talking about, but the implications for research. And millennials increasingly are reluctant, or if not down, just refuse to state a race. They'll say, I'm purple, I'm green, I'm human, because they see the world differently. And that also has implications. If we're used to tracking disparities by race, and half the population is not playing that game, it doesn't make the disparities go away. We need to figure out how to track disparities without resorting to these race questions as we've known them. So, yeah, we've got some good, I'm going to be talking about that for an hour and a half tomorrow on methodology, race, genomics, biomedical research, et cetera. But it all has to do with Cinco de Mayo, Civil War, folks here. I mean,
I guess so. It's not just from a perspective of research, but also just personally in terms of one-to-one communication, promoting sort of social justice ideas. What could a Latin American say when not asked on a forum, but asked face to face?
Somos Americanos, as everyone is in this room. Okay. That's the thing that unites us.
Cool.
Huh?
Okay.
Oh.
Let's go.
One last question. Okay. 2 last questions. Okay, you and then the lady here.
Okay, so I was intrigued that Latin America and Central America was so progressive politically and socially, and they had these ideas about racial equality much before what Lincoln thought. And then, so what happened in these years when Latin America and Central America kind of became less progressive, didn't take the leadership overall, and then America, the United States of America kind of rose of it?
Yeah, actually, there's a lengthy history there. During the Civil War, and for about 10, 20 years afterwards, actually Latin American countries, because of their progressive values, you got to remember, by the way, during the Civil War, the French not only went into Mexico, the Spanish reabsorbed the Dominican Republic, they attacked Ecuador, they attacked Peru, they attacked Chile. They didn't recognize Peruvian independence still during this. So in Latin America, it seemed like the crowned heads were attacking the ideas of Republican democracy. So they saw it as a much more hemisphere-wide, and they felt that, in fact, because of these ideals, Latin America actually points towards the future. But then the Civil War is over, Reconstruction was over, the scientific racism hit, the eugenics movement hit, and it hit around the world, and it hit Latin America. It had somewhat different effects in Latin America, but you had a eugenics movement, you had the Mexican Revolution, where the biggest issue of the Mexican Revolution is where do Indians fit in today's society? And to fix that, they threw the African and the Asian under the bus. Basically, let's focus on the Indians. So you talk to most people, they think, oh, revolution is all about the Indians. There are other things going on. So yeah, and you have had, of course, the U.S. influence, particularly in the eugenics movement. There's very much, they try to get into the Pan American Health Organization. So many of these countries, and they have successfully written their constitution, have not stood as tall as they could have for some of these very basic American rights. And I give the same speech in Mexico, and I say the same thing. Now, finally, the last question. You have the honor.
Thank you. I don't have a question. I wanted to refer a little bit at what you mentioned about how the people from South America define themselves as related to race. And so I never thought about race that way. Not that we don't have differences in class or anything. We have those divisions. And so here in the United States, one of the things that we do, especially in the South, we divide ourselves by color. And so we have the Democratic African American caucuses. We have the Hispanic, groups, and we divide ourselves that way. In my case, I never want to be separated that way. Because if we have issues, women's issues, human issues, children issues, educational issues, is that black, white, or South American? I mean, and so
Yeah,
I don't
everybody.
participate in that. I get invited to be in those groups, and I always say, no, I'm a woman, or I'm an American citizen. I have children, I have grandchildren. What difference does it make? But we make that intentionally. We divide ourselves that way, and so that is what creates the conflict of race.
Was just, I agree totally, but just a little bit of history. Remember, we had the War of Independence, 1776, for these universal values: freedom, equality, democracy. And by the way, in many battles for American independence, more soldiers spoke Spanish than English, but that's a whole other presentation. But then, just 6 years later, we wrote the U.S. Constitution, and to avoid freeing the slaves, we wrote white race into our Constitution, and all of these separations were written into laws against Latinos, African Americans, Asians, and we wrote a whole new Constitution in California. So it's not that we separated ourselves. Right, we were right there in 1770. We got separated out, and now we're trying to push our way back in. And ideally, I think everyone here say, yeah, we ought to get rid of all that. We just get people keep trying to cram it down our throats, and we're just round 8 right now. We'll win out in the end. Don't worry, we'll win in the end. We will be Americans.
Yeah, I'll make a comment, one comment to this
Mhm.
question. Freedom, individual freedom, and freedom to all is extremely fragile. And you're absolutely right.
Mhm.
In South and Latin America, as you defined it,
Mhm.
it collapsed.
Yeah, it sure did. And very fragile, and the pressures on it are too much. Anyway, thank you so much, Billy, for the invitation.
Once you come back up, I got a little token for you. And I think now you all kind of see why he's very impressive. He knows a lot of stuff. So, and we really do appreciate you coming. This is the Arkansas Traveler Certificate.
Oh, all right.
And I'll read a little bit of it. It says, to all whom shall see these present greetings, know ye that the governor of the state of Arkansas, in the name and by the authority of the people of the state, said state, as vested in him by the Constitution and laws of the state of Arkansas, reposing special recognition for the distinguished accomplishments, does hereby appoint and commission Dr. David E. Hayes-Bautista as an Arkansas traveler, and hereby authorize you to commission to serve as an ambassador of goodwill from Arkansas to the people of other states. And basically that's what it says.
Oh,
Okay.
thank you very much.
Thank you. You know, again, we really do appreciate Dr. Bautista coming and sharing with us. And we've kind of already talked about how we can get him back to do some more things. And we kind of talked about also doing some distance, medicine type of stuff, which is a possibility. I think the only other thing I want to do in closing, as far as remarks, is, in thinking about, why we were doing all of this and what it really means. And, one of the things I keep thinking about is that, we're at an academic health center, which is UAMS. And, what's the real purpose of an academic health center? And, when it boils down to it, is for public good, is to serve the public. And, you think about that and you think about, we have an obligation to society. We have an obligation. We have a social contract, even though some people kind of think could put that aside. But part of that social contract is you have an obligation. You have an obligation to provide equitable, quality care to everybody. And that's kind of how we got to where we are, and that's what we're trying to do with this healthcare series, or Health Disparities series. And so, as I mentioned before, I think when you look at populations, and why do populations and why are populations in their current state? And we talk about health disparities and the effect of income and education, and that's really a big part of it. And what events, from a historical standpoint, put those populations at a disadvantage? What put them in an economic and educational position where they can't do well? And we can kind of talk about all the things that do that. But I think when I think about it, and I think about what we're trying to do as a center and at UAMS, And we need to take a look back at those things. So I think that's really that's our best chance of actually addressing the issues. And I totally agree with what Dr. Bautista said, is that historically you have to know what happened. And if you don't really know what happened, then you really can't address those problems at all. So for me, it's been a great visit, although he's got one more day and we'll work him to death over this next day. It's been a good visit. And I think, I think we have gotten to a point that we wanted to achieve. Again, it's great that you came, and we look forward to some more input from you. And the last thing I'll say is that we're trying to. This is just one of a series of lectures that we're calling a Health Disparities Lecture Series, and they're really in honor of Dr. Joycelyn Elders, and we all know Dr. Elders. And one of the things that we will do over the next year is we will develop an endowment that will support these lectures. So if you got some money that's loose and you just let us know. But that's really our aim, and I just think that these types of conversations are really what it's all about, because we, as Dr. Bautista and as people in the audience have said, you really have to take this on as a community, and otherwise it goes nowhere. It goes nowhere. And again, we could talk about numbers and all that stuff, but if you don't have the institutional support and you don't have an environment that actually promotes that, then it does nothing. And I think that's all I'm supposed to do, is that, we have food back here and all the books back here. Cinco de Mayo, El Cinco de Mayo by Dr. Bautista. And again, I appreciate everybody coming. And, if you have ideas as you leave here and you want to feed them back to the center, that anything that we can use to help things progress. And as I said in the beginning, we have to make a bigger footprint in the community. We are in an ivory tower sometimes, but I think we need to make a bigger footprint, and this is just part of it. Okay, all right, thanks.